Divorce Stephen right now.
In a bustling business district, where businessmen in suits walked past, there was a woman shouting in an old shirt and unkempt hair. Passers-by stared in shock at the unusual scene, and I couldn't take my eyes off her trembling lips. I am Misty. I am a 30-year-old office worker who loves browsing through home and interior magazines. My family of 3 currently lives in a small apartment, but my goal is to one day build a house filled with all my dreams. I work at a company that plans and develops furniture and miscellaneous goods, feeling fulfilled every day. My husband Stephen, whom I married 3 years ago, works at a different company and is as reliable as they come. Everyone who meets him says he's a genuinely good person, and I'm proud of him. Our daughter Alice, who was born to us, just turned 1 this year. When I was unsure about returning to work, it was Stephen who supported me.
If you love your job, you should go back. I'll do my best with housework and childcare too.
That's right, Misty. If Alice gets sick, we'll take care of her, so don't worry. Catherine, my mother-in-law, said with a reassuring smile, standing next to Stephen with pride. With understanding and reliable Stephen and my in-laws, I felt truly blessed. Watching their warm smiles, I often felt happiness wash over me. Despite having such an enviable marriage, there was one thing that bothered me. That was the existence of his younger sister, Kayla. In the 5 years since I started dating Stephen, I have never seen her face. I've only heard that she dropped out of school and has been shut in her room on the 2nd floor of my in-laws' house ever since. I even thought Stephen was an only child until we got engaged. We were invited to a high-end restaurant, rather than my in-laws' house, for the introduction.
Kayla had a mental breakdown in high school. If she met Misty, she might lose it and become violent, so we can't have her at home.
We will take care of Kayla ourselves. You don't need to worry about anything, Misty. Stephen and his parents explained with very sad expressions. Honestly, I wish they had told me sooner, and although Kayla's existence made me uneasy, I had already accepted Stephen's proposal and introduced him to my parents. The wedding venue was booked, and I had already informed my company. I had no choice but to trust that kind Stephen and his parents would keep their promises. Looking back, I should have paid attention to the discomfort I felt then. At that time, it never occurred to me that Stephen could have a hidden side. After getting married, we visited my in-laws' house a few times, but I never met Kayla. Even when we were in the living room, I never heard a sound from the ceiling. If they hadn't told me about her, I would have never known I had a sibling-in-law. After Alice was born and I returned to work, I was so busy and fulfilled that I stopped worrying about Kayla altogether. However, there was a period when Stephen started coming home late frequently. When I asked if something was wrong,
My mom's not feeling well, so I've been going to check on her.
he said. When I offered to help with housework on my days off,
It's fine, my dad's there.
he lightly refused. Considering her situation and Catherine's kindness, I thought she might feel uncomfortable if I was bustling around. I convinced myself and stopped questioning further. After a while, when Stephen's return time went back to normal, he suddenly asked me,
The house needs major repairs, so I thought we could rebuild it into a 2-family home. We can live on the 2nd floor.
"What?" Stephen, with his usual gentle smile, said something outrageous, and I was stunned. In all the time we'd been dating and married, I'd never heard a word about living with his parents. "You mean, we'll be living with Catherine and Jason?"
Yeah, you said you wanted to have a house, right? So why not take the chance to build our own space while renovating the house?
"What?" Stephen's calm response to my hesitant question only confused me more. It's true that I've been saving money for a home, avoiding luxuries, and researching good plots of land for building. But that was for a new house for just Stephen, Alice, and me, not to live with my in-laws.
Yes, I want a house, but I meant our own home.
You can decide the layout however you like, and we'll get financial support. It's our home, isn't it?
But the land and the house will be under Jason's name, right?
Yes, but eventually I'll inherit it, so it's the same, isn't it?
I understood what Stephen was saying, but I couldn't agree.
Do you not want to live with my parents?
I was slightly startled by Stephen's low voice, something I'd never heard before.
It's not that. It's just too sudden. And what about Kayla?
I finally remembered her existence. Yes, the reason I never considered living with my in-laws was because of her.
Wouldn't she be uncomfortable living with Alice and me? What if she harms Alice?
Oh, don't worry about that. She is getting married.
Stephen responded calmly.
What?
I was stunned by Stephen's nonchalant reply.
Kayla getting married? How? She's been a recluse since high school.
She met a guy on a dating app and insists on marrying him. So, there's nothing for you to worry about, Misty.
Really? Could that be true?
I wanted to question further, but Stephen's demeanor made it clear that the conversation was over.
You don't need to worry about Kayla. Besides, if you're going to keep working, wouldn't you feel better knowing my parents are looking after Alice? She wouldn't feel lonely either.
Maybe.
It's a mutually beneficial arrangement, so I'd appreciate it if you could consider it positively.
Okay.
Stephen always said things that seemed to show he cared about me with his usual smile, but the aura of not accepting any objections was overwhelming. The smile from Stephen that I once loved and found comforting now seemed terrifyingly expressionless, sending a cold sweat down my spine.
Something felt off. Stephen and his parents were kind, so living together shouldn't be a problem. Even though the dream of owning a home would take on a different form, it was still achievable.
But the uneasy feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. A week after the sudden proposal for cohabitation. As I left work, I noticed a woman with long hair standing outside the company premises. She drew attention not only from me, but also from other passers-by. Her messy hair, unkempt skin, and old clothes with stretched-out shoulders were incredibly out of place in the office district, making me wary of making eye contact and wanting to pass by quickly. However, she stood in my way, staring at me intently.
Yes? Misty? What?
Without meeting my gaze, the woman accurately guessed my name in a hesitant but clear voice. As I stood bewildered, she continued.
Stephen's wife. What? Stephen? No way.
Kayla? I called her name cautiously, and she looked slightly surprised. It seemed I was correct. Upon closer inspection, her eyes did resemble those of Stephen and Catherine. However, her skin and hair were so lackluster that she looked much older than her 26 years.
Why was she here at my workplace? How did she even know where I worked?
As questions flooded my mind, she interrupted me with a loud outburst.
Divorce Stephen! What? Leave him! Now! Divorce him!
Her repeated cries drew curious and confused looks from passers-by. More than the shock of her sudden demand, I felt an overwhelming need to defuse the situation. I quickly grabbed her arm.
Wait a minute! What's going on? What happened?
She stopped abruptly, as if her wind-up had run out.
He's a devil in human skin. If you don't escape now, you'll suffer terribly. A devil?
Her unexpected words left me momentarily bewildered. I had expected her to be jealous or to think of me as an intruder, but this was different.
A devil? Who are you talking about? My entire family.
Kayla whispered.
Stephen and his parents, devils? No way, not those kind, gentle people.
As I stood puzzled, Kayla began to haltingly explain. She recounted how, since she was little, she had been constantly compared to the high-achieving Stephen and lived under constant criticism. How, from elementary school onwards, she was burdened with household chores and denied time to play with friends or pursue hobbies. How her hopes for higher education were dismissed. How, after her health deteriorated, she was forced to work from home as a web designer, with all her earnings taken away. Despite this, she was not provided with adequate clothing or food. And when she became too ill to work, she was to be sold off to a 45-year-old bachelor farmer, a relative of her father. The details were so harrowing that they didn't align at all with the peaceful image I had of the family.
I overheard my parents talking. They said since I'm useless now, it's your turn next. That's why. That's why.
Kayla. Stephen had told me that. She suffered from mental illness and had a tendency to lie. This could all be part of her delusions, and I might be getting deceived. But as I looked at her trembling hands, it was hard to believe she was lying. Having been a recluse for so long, how much courage had it taken for her to come to see me? Seeing me troubled, Kayla now plays a recording on her smartphone. What I heard was a side of Stephen and his family I never knew.
Kayla is really useless. It's fine if she gets married. Her husband's family will give us a lot of money. Don't worry, Mom. Misty is strong and good at making money. Use her as much as you want. If she tries to escape, we can use Alice as a hostage.
I got goosebumps hearing them talk about people like slaves. Even though the content was so different from the impression I had of them, there was no mistaking Stephen's and his parents' voices. I was shocked and didn't want to believe it, but it explained the unease I'd been feeling lately. The sudden announcement of living together, and Kayla saying she was getting married to a man she met on an app, it was all because they were planning to sell her off to an older bachelor. And then they chose me as the next candidate for their slave. Behind those smiles, they had been plotting such a terrifying scheme.
Do you believe me now?
With tears in her eyes, Kayla pleaded, and I couldn't even nod in response, shaking.
I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe it, but if this was true, I needed to escape right away.
I asked her to keep recording and started packing without Stephen noticing. During this time, Stephen, unaware of anything, continued to happily discuss our future living arrangements. I became scared when I realized they had already set a move-in date without my agreement. Stephen's parents even brought catalogs for plumbing equipment, saying, "One kitchen and one bathroom are enough, right? We're all so close after all." They were forcing such outrageous things on me. Even so, I continued to prepare to leave while smiling. Part of me still wanted to believe that Stephen and his family weren't such terrible people. How I wished I could laugh it off, thinking it was just Kayla's misunderstanding while I was packing. But by the time I left home, I was convinced Kayla's story was true because they kept planning everything without me. 1 week after meeting Kayla, on Friday, I took a day off work and left an unsigned divorce petition and a lawyer's business card on my desk before returning to my parents' house. Naturally, that night, Stephen called me multiple times. So the next day, I suggested we meet at a family restaurant near Stephen's parents' house to talk.
Why are you suddenly asking for a divorce? Did I do something terrible to you, Misty?
Stephen, who was already seated at the table, said this with a sad smile as if they were the victims.
Misty, what's wrong? Is it my fault? Misty, if there's anything you don't like, just tell us. We're family, after all.
Stephen's parents, who were sitting there as if it was the most natural thing, also spoke to me, trying to soothe my mood. From an outsider's perspective, I looked like the bad person.
I worked diligently, helped with housework and childcare. I can swear I didn't cheat or gamble.
That's right, you are an ideal husband.
Then why?
Stephen's eyes welled up like a puppy's. But I won't be fooled anymore. Kayla told me about the horrible things you and Catherine did to her and your plan to make me the next punching bag.
Huh?
Stephen's eyes twitched. The faces of his parents stiffened, and a cold atmosphere settled in.
When did you meet her?
Well, that's none of your business. I deftly sidestepped Stephen's gentle but probing question. Stephen's mouth twitched slightly.
I told you before, didn't I? Kayla is mentally ill and has a history of lying. You're going to believe someone like that over the husband who's loved and cared for you for 5 years?
Yes, I wanted to believe you too.
Then,
Until I heard this recording. I played the recording Kayla gave me on the voice recorder I held in my left hand. It wasn't just the conversation I heard outside the company. There were several recordings from the past week of horrible conversations between Stephen and his parents. The color drained from Stephen's and his parents' faces.
that woman!
Stephen banged the table and shouted profanities. So, you've finally shown your true colors, I said coldly, and Stephen looked at me as if he realized something.
No, it's not what it seems. This is a trap. Kayla is a shut-in who spends all her time on the computer, so she's good at synthesizing voices.
That's right. Misty, please believe us. We didn't do such terrible things to Kayla. We're the ones suffering because of her.
That's right. She is insane.
Even now, they still tell such lies.
I took a small breath and lifted the voice recorder as if to show it off. Understood. If this is synthesized, we'll have it verified by the proper authorities.
What?
Their faces turned even paler at my suggestion. It will cost money, but it can't be helped. If this is fabricated, I'll have to sue Kayla.
Wait a minute.
I'm sorry for doubting you. I'm taking this data to a friend who's good with computers.
I said wait.
Stephen swiped at the voice recorder, knocking over the glasses on the table as it fell to the floor. He stomped on it with force, glaring at me without even catching his breath.
I can treat my sister and wife however I want. Women are just inferior versions of men.
That crude voice was exactly the same as the one Kayla had played for me on the recorder. So, that's how you really feel.
Yeah, that's right. I've been holding back to tame a woman like you who isn't too bad-looking or earning, as a replacement for when Kayla becomes useless.
You're the worst. As I furrowed my brows, Catherine tried to soothe me with a troubled smile.
It's unavoidable, Misty. For a woman to live happily, she needs someone below her. It might be a little tough for you, but once you have a son and a wife for him, you'll understand how I feel. Oh, and there's Alice before that.
What? What is this woman saying?
The intense disgust made my hair stand on end.
Are you telling me to exploit Alice?
Don't be crude, Misty.
Catherine said, laughing brightly. Jason nodded vigorously beside her.
I've had enough. I don't even want to think of myself as the same kind of human as these people.
I don't consider myself beneath Stephen, nor do I understand the desire to turn daughters and wives into slaves. I have no intention of becoming your plaything.
Suppressing my urge to hurl insults, I calmly rejected them. When I stood up, indicating I had no intention of further discussion, Stephen grabbed my bag.
Wait. You're clearly not thinking straight, all worked up like this. Listen, I've been a good husband and a good father. Your parents and friends believe that, didn't they? Who will support your decision to divorce such a wonderful man? They'll all look at you coldly, wondering why you'd leave someone so great. And if I cry and say Misty was unfaithful, who do you think they'll believe?
This despicable man. His sleazy smile made me feel nothing but disgust. I glanced around subtly, making sure Stephen didn't notice. The timing should be just right. I shook off Stephen's hand and stood tall with confidence. It's fine. I have evidence.
The evidence is crushed under my foot.
Stephen sneered. Not that one.
What?
I clapped my hands once in front of the puzzled Stephen. Then, the people sitting diagonally behind Stephen and his parents approached us.
Thank you so much for looking after Misty.
What? The person who greeted my astonished in-laws with a smile, despite the vein throbbing on his forehead, was my father.
Stephen, I understand your values now. Kevin! Stephen.
Stephen's manager and colleagues, who had attended our wedding, looked down at him with contempt. Indeed, as Stephen had boasted, no one believed in his cruel hidden side. So, I had pleaded with them to wait secretly. Especially the manager and colleagues, who had been there to prove his innocence. Their disillusionment with Stephen was bound to be profound. Now, the evidence is solid. Stephen's face turned bright red, and he choked on his words. He had no room left to cover up. Let's continue this discussion with the lawyers present. Leaving the growling Stephen and the stunned in-laws behind, I exited the family restaurant. My father and the company people would make sure to take care of the rest. As I wished, the divorce was finalized without any issues. I thought they would put up more resistance, but they were too preoccupied with other matters.
Where is Kayla?
When I saw Stephen again at the lawyer's office, he demanded angrily, his eyes bloodshot. How would I know? I'm just an outsider. I scoffed. Stephen's eyes twitched at my response. Still, desperate to find out Kayla's whereabouts, he put on a fake smile and pleaded.
Please, tell me where Kayla is. Her fiancé is furious.
You people are the ones who arranged her marriage without her consent.
She was only useful for that. What else could we do?
Seeing Stephen go mad while uttering such horrific things even made our usually stoic lawyer show signs of disgust. Of course, I had helped her escape. I couldn't abandon the person who saved my life. While we were discussing the divorce at the family restaurant, my friend had moved Kayla and her belongings to a place beyond Stephen and his family's reach. When my friend saw Kayla's belongings amounted to just 2 cardboard boxes, she almost cried. Kayla's safety was ensured, and once she settled down, we planned to sue them through the lawyer. Not that I would ever tell Stephen.
We treated her so well. Why are you destroying our family?
Your family was awful from the start.
Stephen banged the table in rage. I was truly relieved to have separated before this fist could be directed at me or my daughter. Stephen and his family's downfall afterward was spectacular. Apparently, my in-laws loved gambling and had spent most of Kayla's earnings on it. When Kayla could no longer earn, they couldn't stop their gambling addiction and accumulated massive debts. In desperation, they latched onto Kayla's marriage proposal. It was a deal where a 45-year-old farmer offered $30,000 for her to bear a child for him, completely disregarding human rights. Of course, with the deal failing, they got no money. Moreover, Stephen's dark side was exposed at work, leading to scorn from both men and women. While he could dish it out, Stephen couldn't take it, and he eventually had a mental breakdown and quit his job. Without me, their remodeling plans fell apart, leaving them to shiver in their decrepit house, which was also on the verge of being seized by debt collectors. My in-laws frantically searched for Kayla, but with no money, they had no chance of finding her after she moved far away. Simultaneously, they tried finding a new wife for Stephen, but rumors about their dangerous household, spread by an acquaintance who had been at the family restaurant, ensured no one would go near them. They were fools trapped by the holes they had dug themselves. As for me, 3 years after divorcing Stephen, I remarried and found a good match. We also found an ideal piece of land and are currently planning our dream home with my new husband, visiting model houses and making plans. Kayla too has found good people and work in her new location and seems to have recovered both mentally and physically. Recently, she sent me a picture of her with her new boyfriend. She looked beautifully made up and had a bright smile next to her handsome new partner. Both Kayla and I are living the happiest days of our lives.
How long do you plan to stay in bed? Don't slack off on the housework just because you have a little cold.
I was startled by my husband Lian's angry voice, which was so close that it felt like it was right in my ear. I shot up from the couch, feeling disoriented. I had a fever of 104 degrees Fahrenheit since this morning and had to call in sick to work. Even seeing me in such a bad condition, Lian showed no concern.
If you're staying home all day, at least do the housework,
he said before leaving for work. If the chores weren't done by the time Lian got home, he would be furious and scold me harshly. The mere thought of it terrified me. But my body wouldn't cooperate, and I had passed out on the couch. The room was dark when I woke up, and there was him, standing before me with an angry expression.
Don't you dare you say you spend the whole day sleeping?
As he questioned me, I felt the blood drain from my face. I wanted to run away, but my body was too heavy and weak to move. He had always demanded that I do all the housework, treating me like a servant every single day. When we were dating, he had been kind, but his attitude drastically changed once we got married. Despite everything, a part of me still wanted to believe in him, but the constant verbal abuse had worn me down. I'm sorry. I'll start dinner right away. Holding back tears, I struggled to stand up from the couch. Lian didn't offer to help me. Instead, he yelled at me from behind as I made my way to the kitchen.
You're completely useless.
Immediately after, I felt a sharp pain in my back, and my body lurched forward. Lian had kicked me from behind.
Hurry up and make dinner. And get the shower ready. Oh, and the fridge is out of beer. Go buy some now.
Looking down at me with a cold voice, he ordered me around. I couldn't take it anymore. It felt as if he was telling me I was worth no more than a slave, and despair washed over me. I didn't understand why I had to endure such treatment, and tears streamed down my face. Please, stop it already. I pleaded, but he only laughed mockingly. As he lifted his foot to kick me again, I heard a familiar voice from the living room entrance.
Is there anything else you want to say?
My name is Mary. I currently live alone, away from my family, working as a sales clerk at a certain company. I lost my mother early on and lived with my father until I got a job. My father, who is gentle and serious, poured all his love into his only daughter to make up for my mother's absence. He went through a lot for my sake, and I am truly grateful to him for raising me and sending me to college. When I got a job and moved out, parting from my father was unbearably sad. Mary, I'll always be on your side. If you ever need help, you can always count on me. With a gentle smile, my father saw me off. We keep in touch regularly and update each other on our lives. During summer vacations and Christmas, I go back home, and my father always welcomes me warmly, which brings me peace. My father holds a high position at his workplace, and his advice has been very helpful in my early career. I've just entered my second year at my current company. I had finally gotten used to my work life and was starting to feel more fulfilled with the increasing responsibilities I was being given. One day, as I was heading to the break room for lunch, a man approached me and started a conversation.
Hey there, Mary.
The man who greeted me with a bright smile was none other than Lien, the man who would later become my husband. Lien was 3 years older than me and worked in sales. He was also the son of the company's president, though he never flaunted this fact. Whenever we met in the break room, he was always the first to say hello. Because we weren't that far apart in age, I found him easy to talk to and had always had a positive impression of him.
Looks like you've been working hard lately.
Our success is thanks to the support from you and the other office staff.
We really appreciate it.
Hearing this made me smile naturally.
Thank you very much.
When I responded, I've been wanting to talk to you about things other than work.
How about we go out for a meal sometime?
He continued. Lien was apparently drawn to my diligent work ethic and wanted to get to know me better. I was taken aback by his proposal since I had never been approached so directly by a man before.
Are you sure about me?
Of course.
How about we exchange numbers?
I'll text you tonight. As I hesitated, Lien took out his smartphone and continued the conversation with a smile. At times like this, his slightly pushy nature would come through. Lien had a confident and decisive personality, never hesitating to make decisions. In contrast, I had always been timid and often found myself unable to express my opinions, constantly worrying about others' reactions. That's why I found his assertiveness and decisiveness so attractive. After exchanging contact information, we started communicating privately and went out for meals together several times. As we spent more time together, he eventually confessed his feelings to me.
I really like you, Mary. Will you go out with me?
Hearing this made me incredibly happy. By then, I had also developed feelings for Lien, so there was no reason for me to refuse. Thus, we started dating and our relationship seemed to be going smoothly. However, as our relationship became known within the company, I began to receive warnings from my colleagues.
You might not know this because you haven't been here long, but Lien has some personality issues. There are even people who left the company because of him.
A senior colleague who had been kind to me since I joined the company gave me this warning. Another close colleague,
I saw him yelling at someone who seemed timid in the break room the other day. He did it in front of everyone. I think it's best if you stop dating him,
said. But when I thought back to his behavior, I couldn't imagine him doing something like that. He could be pushy, but I couldn't see him cornering someone or shouting at them. I understood that my colleagues were concerned for my well-being, but it hurt to hear Lien being painted as the bad guy. He had always been sincere with me, leading me with confidence when I struggled with indecision. I loved that about him, so I decided to take the rumors with a grain of salt and not let them affect my feelings. Even after hearing those stories, I continued my relationship with him, and a year into our dating.
Mary, don't you think it's time we got married?
Lien asked me one day while we were spending a day off together at his place. I was 25 at the time, and Lien was 28. I honestly felt it was still too early for us to get married. However, he had a strong desire to get married and was the type to act immediately once he made up his mind. I really love Mary. That's why I want to get married as soon as possible.
Mary, you want to marry me someday too, right?
Yes, of course.
Then there's no need to wait.
We both have good incomes, so our married life should be stable. And if you want to continue working after we get married, I won't oppose it. His serious expression left me at a loss for words. Lien was unlikely to change his mind, and in the end, I nodded, overwhelmed by his determination.
Great! Thank you, Mary. I'll cherish you forever.
Seeing Lien so happy, I couldn't voice my fears about marriage. But I also wanted to marry Lien eventually and walk through life together, so I decided to think positively about it. The past year of dating Lien had been so much fun, I believed our married life would be just as enjoyable. Shortly after, we went to my father's house to announce our engagement. My father was surprised at first, but soon smiled gently.
Mary is no longer a child. I won't oppose what she has decided,
he said. Then he looked Lien straight in the eye and said,
Please take care of Mary. She lost her mother early and didn't have siblings, so she's been lonely. Please be there for her in my place.
My father had always put me first. His words were filled with love for me, and I found myself tearing up, even though we weren't married yet. Lien responded,
Yes, I will,
with a proud look. Mary, I'll always be watching over you from this house. If things get tough, you can always come back. As we were about to leave, my father called out and said these warm words. His kind words brought tears to my eyes again. I was so happy that my beloved father blessed our marriage. A few days later, we went to Lien's family's home for a family meeting. Lien's father, Jim, who was also our company's president, was strict at work but easygoing in private. Lien's mother, Susan, welcomed me warmly and was delighted about our marriage.
Please take care of Lien. If he ever causes you trouble, feel free to rely on us,
Jim said politely to me. I was taken aback since I had only seen him in his professional capacity. You're exaggerating, Dad. Mary is surprised, Lien said, exasperated, but Jim, who was serious about everything, treated me with respect and courtesy. Although Lien had told me his father was strict and intimidating, I found Jim to be very thoughtful and kind. I felt reassured that I could build a good relationship with my in-laws, and soon, Lien and I got married. We moved into a spacious apartment and started our life together. I decided to continue working and try my best to balance my job and household chores. However, looking back, I realized I had underestimated marriage. Until then, we had hardly ever fought, and I believed we would continue to get along well after becoming a married couple. It only took about a week after our wedding for me to realize how wrong I was. As we started getting used to living together, I began to notice Lien's flaws that hadn't bothered me while we were dating. First of all, he doesn't help with any of the housework. I also work full-time, so I suggested we split the chores, but he wouldn't listen. He lived alone before we got married, so he should be able to do all the housework, but as soon as we got married, he stopped doing anything around the house. Housework is a wife's job, isn't it?
Unlike you, Mary, I have to go out for work, not just sit in an office all day. I come home exhausted every day, so there's no way I can help with the chores.
He uses this excuse to leave everything to me. Sure, Lien is busy visiting clients and negotiating with customers every day. He often has overtime, so I do feel bad asking him to help with the housework. But that's not the only problem.
What about dinner? And you haven't even prepared my shower yet. I'm tired, so hurry up. And there was no beer. Go buy some later.
When Lien comes home from work, he lounges on the sofa and orders me around like this. The constant demands are making my head spin.
Wait a minute. I just got home myself. I'll make dinner right away, but can you get the beer yourself? What? Why should I go out again? Stop complaining and just go get it.
When I argue back, he gets angry and yells at me, and I always end up losing the argument to him. Since we got married, Lien's attitude towards me has changed, and he has become more arrogant. And his attitude wasn't just limited to our home. It happened one day at his office during lunch break.
How many times do I have to tell you? Why can't you get it right?
I heard his irritated voice and looked over to see Lien reprimanding an employee. A colleague sitting with me sighed. "He is at it again," in a weary tone. She was the one who had told me before about Lien yelling at coworkers in the break room. I whispered,
"Has he always been like this?"
asked. She nodded. "Yeah.
You may not have seen it before, Mary, but he does this all the time,"
and said. I couldn't believe it and looked back at him. He was still yelling angrily, using even harsher words.
"This company will be mine in the future. When I'm the boss, I'll fire useless people like you right away."
The words were unbearable to hear, so I stood up and went over to Lien. As his wife, I couldn't just watch the situation from afar.
"What are you doing? Stop it already."
When I spoke up, he glared at me irritably. It seemed he finally realized that everyone in the break room was watching him. He clicked his tongue in annoyance and walked away without saying anything. The next night, when Lien came home, he shouted at me.
"Mary, what was that about at lunch? An incompetent employee talking back to the future president."
His words were so harsh that I was stunned into silence.
"But, Lien, your behavior was too much."
I mustered the courage to point out his attitude, but it only seemed to provoke him more. I was stunned.
"Shut up. Don't you dare tell me what to do, Mary, when you're useless both at work and at home."
When he threw his bag onto the floor and shouted. Being naturally timid, I couldn't muster the courage to argue back, so I just looked down. It was incredibly shocking to be called incompetent both at work and at home. He had once admired my dedication to my job, saying that was what drew him to me. And I genuinely believed I was doing my best at both work and household chores. No matter how tired I was after returning home from work, I made sure to complete all the housework that same day. Yet, Lien seemed completely oblivious to my efforts, which made me incredibly sad. I started noticing Lien's frequent verbal abuse towards colleagues at work. However, he skillfully hid his true nature in front of Jim and our bosses, targeting only those who were timid or held lower positions than him. He arrogantly boasted about taking over the company one day, all the while hurling baseless insults. The bad rumors I had heard about Lien from coworkers turned out to be true. His domineering behavior extended beyond the office and became worse towards me.
"Dinner's not ready yet? And the shower isn't prepared either? You know when I get home, right? Normally, a wife would have everything perfectly ready by the time her husband returns."
He would coldly criticize me, saying, even though we both finished work at the same time unless Lien worked late. It was impossible for me to have dinner and the shower ready at exactly the right time. Yet, he would sigh deeply in frustration and say,
"What's the point of being married if my wife is this useless?
You're worthless at work too." I would weakly respond,
"I'm sorry. I'll get it ready right away."
His cold stare would pierce through me. The daily grind of being treated like a slave both at home and work was wearing me down. There were moments I thought about reaching out to my father or Jim because living under the same roof as Lien was unbearable. But both of them had been so happy for our marriage, and I didn't want to burden them. Most importantly, I was terrified of what he would do if he found out I confided in them. It was clear that things would get even worse if he knew. One day, something happened that made me wish I had sought help sooner. I woke up feeling incredibly weak and measured my temperature, finding it had reached 104 degrees Fahrenheit. I had pushed myself too hard and fallen ill. Getting out of bed was a struggle, so I decided I had to take a day off work. Just then, I heard Lien shouting from outside the bedroom. I dragged my aching body to the living room to prepare his breakfast. Lien was waiting, visibly irritated, and I explained my condition.
My temperature is 104 degrees Fahrenheit, so I've decided to stay home from work today. I'm sorry, but I could only prepare a simple breakfast.
Lien glared at me with annoyance.
It's just a cold. Don't complain. You must handle yourself better.
There was no sign of concern from him. After eating the breakfast I had managed to prepare while feeling faint, Lien coldly said,
"Just because you're staying home from work doesn't mean you get to sleep all day. If you slack off on the housework, you'll regret it."
He then left for work. Before we got married, if I had a cold and was bedridden, Lien would come over and take care of me. I couldn't believe how much he had changed. But since we started living together, Lien's arrogant personality had become apparent. I couldn't understand why I had agreed to marry Lien, and tears started to flow. After having a small breakfast and taking some fever medicine, I thought I should do some chores, but my consciousness was fuzzy and my body wouldn't cooperate. When you're alone and not feeling well, your thoughts tend to spiral negatively. I thought about calling my dad for help, but he was probably just starting work at the office. I didn't want to bother him, so I collapsed onto the couch. I decided to rest a bit before doing any housework and closed my eyes, quickly losing consciousness. It's unclear how much time passed after that.
"Mary, how long are you going to sleep? You haven't even started dinner."
Lien's angry voice startled me, and I shot up from the couch.
"What? Lien, you're back? What time is it?"
The lights were on in the room, and when I glanced at the window, it was already dark outside. I realized I'd been asleep since the afternoon and felt a chill run through me.
"What is this mess? You haven't cleaned or done the laundry. Don't tell me you've been slacking off all day. What were you doing?"
Being scolded right after waking up gave me a headache. Whether the fever medicine didn't work or had worn off, my body was still hot and I felt dazed. Lien was furious, and all I could do was apologize.
I'm sorry, I wasn't feeling well. I'll start making dinner right away.
I answered in a weak voice, struggling to stand up from the couch. Lien didn't offer a hand, and instead glared at me with a harsh expression.
"Don't use feeling sick as an excuse to slack off. You even took off work, so the least you could do is have the house chores done by the time I get home. You're completely useless."
His heartless words pushed me to my limit. With tears welling up in my eyes and my voice trembling, I protested.
"What do you say? I'm not your housekeeper. Can't I rest when I'm feeling sick? We're supposed to help each other out, especially at times like this. Who do you think you're talking to? Hurry up and get dinner and the shower ready. I'm tired."
He completely ignored my plea and only thought about himself. I was so frustrated, but I felt dizzy and was on the verge of collapsing, so I didn't have the strength to argue anymore. Turning my back to him, I headed to the kitchen to start dinner preparations. Then,
"You're using a cold as an excuse to slack off. You useless slave."
he said something terrible. Immediately after, I felt a sharp pain in my back and stumbled forward. To my horror, he had kicked me from behind. Letting out a small scream, I fell and hit my head on the corner of the couch. Holding my aching head, I curled up on the floor, and Lien looked down at me with irritation.
"By the way, there's no beer in the fridge. Go buy some now. Get up."
He rushed me with a cold voice, and I finally couldn't take it anymore. With tears streaming down my face, I looked up at Lien. Please, stop. I pleaded. But Lien just sneered.
Do you think crying will solve anything? That pisses me off even more. Why do you think I married you? Even if you're useless, at least be somewhat useful to me.
Hearing Lien's words, I felt darkness creeping in. So he married me just to treat me like a slave? He was telling me I was worth nothing more.
Wasn't he so kind before we got married? Was that all a lie too?
I asked, recalling the gentle Lien from before our marriage. Then Lien sneered at my question, as if mocking me.
Oh, that. It was a hassle, but I tried hard to make a good impression on Mary. I thought I could easily fool her since she's so timid.
Hearing those words shattered the part of me that still wanted to believe in Lien.
How could you do something so terrible?
Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. Lien looked at me with disgust.
Get up already,
he demanded, lifting one foot to kick me again. Unable to stand, I covered my head with my hands and closed my eyes. But at that moment, a voice that wasn't Lien's came from the living room entrance.
Have you nothing left to say?
A familiar voice, flat but tinged with anger, directed at Lien. As I raised my head, Lien turned to look as well. There stood my father and Jim, both with angry expressions. The voice was unmistakably Jim's.
What? Dad? And Paul, why are you here?
Ignoring the panicked Lien, my father rushed to me and helped me up.
Mary, are you okay? Jim told me you had a fever and took the day off work.
Jim is my father-in-law's name.
Dad.
Hearing my father speak so gently released the tension in me, and I couldn't help but cry out loud. As he rubbed my back, my father glared at Lien with a furious expression.
We came to check on you because Jim was worried, and look what we find. What have you done to her?
Lien, overwhelmed by my father's intensity, stepped back, only to find Jim standing behind him.
It was clear from Lien's behavior at work that he didn't care about Mary. Has he always been so cruel to her? Shame on you.
Jim, who had harshly scolded Lien, had found out that I hadn't gone to work due to illness and asked Lien about my condition. When Lien's response was indifferent, Jim grew suspicious and contacted my father to come check on me. Jim's concern touched my heart, and I wept even more.
Wait, Dad. It's a misunderstanding. I was just scolding Mary because she slept all day and didn't do any housework after taking the day off.
Still trying to make excuses, Lien faced Jim's cold stare.
Why would Lien expect his sick wife to do all the housework? Can't he do some of it himself? Well, because she has always done everything, and in our relationship, housework is her job.
Hearing Lien's selfish words, my father spoke up next.
Don't be ridiculous. I saw you yelling at Mary and kicking her over. Instead of caring for your sick wife, you called her a slave and treat her so horribly. Don't you feel any shame?
Lien, pale and desperate, looked to Jim for help. But Jim wouldn't let him off.
We'll finish this talk at home. Today, you're going back to your parents' place.
Saying. Lien, with no way to argue against Jim, started trembling.
No way.
And then he collapsed, foaming at the mouth. Afterward, Jim apologized deeply, and my father took me to the hospital. The doctor explained that the sudden fever was likely due to overwork and stress. With this diagnosis, I was given a medical certificate and decided to take some time off work to recover. My father insisted that I couldn't return home and had me stay at his house to rest. However, the next day, he started contacting me frequently. He had been scolded thoroughly by Jim yesterday and seemed subdued, but it appears Lien hadn't learned his lesson at all. I received dozens of messages from Lien, all of which were insults directed at me, filled with crude and childish language.
It's all your fault that my dad yelled at me all night. You humiliated me. It's all your fault.
Messages like this kept coming, and my anger gradually turned into exasperation. I started to feel disgusted with myself for getting involved with such an irredeemable person. I felt it was foolish to have listened to Lien all this time, and at that moment, I decided to divorce him clearly. I communicated my intent to divorce via message and planned to discuss it once I recovered my health. I was scared to return to the house where Lien was, but my father and Jim agreed to accompany me, which lightened my heart a little. As soon as the discussion began, I handed Lien the divorce papers. However, Lien, sitting across the table from me,
I will never agree to a divorce,
said sulkily. Jim then,
stop being so childish,
scolded Lien. Next, my father, sitting next to me, slammed the table and glared at Lien with a stern expression.
Think about how you treated Mary. How could you not have apologized even once up until now? Shouldn't you apologize to her before complaining?
Both Jim and my father, their faces red with anger, started blaming Lien. Unable to counter their intensity, Lien turned pale. After hesitating for a while, he finally apologized to me begrudgingly.
I'm sorry, but I absolutely don't want a divorce. Well, then look at this.
Fed up with Lien's refusal to divorce, I pulled out a piece of paper from my bag. When I placed it next to the divorce papers on the table, Lien's eyes widened in surprise. It was a medical certificate from the hospital.
Read what it says here. My high fever was due to the mental stress and overwork caused by you, Lien. If you don't agree to the divorce, I will take this to court. Court? Wait a minute. Please don't do that.
Lien began to panic, but I was prepared to go to court if he didn't agree to the divorce. Besides the medical certificate, Jim had cleverly recorded a video when Lien kicked me, providing evidence that would be overwhelmingly against Lien in court. Lien looked to Jim for help. Of course, Jim was not going to side with him. With a stern expression, he silently urged Lien to sign.
All right.
Finally giving up, Lien reluctantly signed the divorce papers. Thus, the divorce was finalized, and I was awarded compensation greater than the usual amount. I returned to my father's house and began living with him again. After our divorce became known at the company, Lien, who had been behaving arrogantly, started being looked down upon by the employees. His pride wouldn't allow him to quit, so he continued going to work despite the cold treatment he received. Despite causing such a commotion, he still believed he would eventually take over the company. However, Jim, furious over the incident, decided to appoint a competent employee within the company as his successor instead of a family member. When he announced this, the employee's attitudes toward Lien changed drastically. Finding himself completely ostracized, Lien could no longer bear the situation and unbelievably came to my father's house. It was an event that happened just when my symptoms had finally subsided and I had regained a peaceful life.
It's all your fault. My parents have abandoned me too. What are you going to do about it? You've ruined my life.
He shouted at the entrance, glaring at me with resentful eyes. I realized he had no remorse for his past actions, and I was really angry.
Don't be ridiculous. I'm the one whose life has been ruined. If you keep causing trouble, I'll call the police. What?
Lien seemed taken aback that I would talk back, but quickly turned red and started yelling again.
Don't mess with me. Don't you dare treat me like a fool.
Then he grabbed me and yanked my hair violently. The memory of being kicked before flashed back, and I let out a small scream, unable to move.
Stop it. Let go of Mary!
My father immediately stepped in and pulled Lien away from me.
You haven't learned anything. From now on, stay away from her.
While my father was scolding Lien, I managed to call the police, my hands trembling. The police arrived quickly and restrained him.
Damn it!
He shouted, glaring at my father and me angrily until the very end. That was the last time I saw Lien. After that, Lien was fired from his company. When Jim found out that Lien had come to my house, he came to apologize in person.
I'm really sorry.
Jim apologized deeply, and my father and I tried to soothe him.
It's not your fault. It's okay now.
No, I'm Lien's father. It was my fault for how I raised him.
It was so painful to see him genuinely ashamed. I would never forgive Lien for causing so much trouble for his parents. Lien was issued a restraining order to stay away from me. After my leave of absence, I decided to resign from my company for good.
Mary, it's not your fault. I know how much you've done for the company. Can't you stay?
Jim tried to persuade me, but my decision was firm. Thank you, but staying would just make things awkward with you. I'm sorry for causing trouble. I'm really grateful for everything you've done for me. I expressed my gratitude to Jim and declined his offer, leaving the company. After that, my father suggested I come work for his company, but I refused. It would have been easy to say yes, but I didn't want to rely on my father too much. I shook my head because I didn't want to develop a sense of dependence.
I want to reassess my weak personality. From now on, I'll try to stand on my own.
When I declared that, my father looked a bit sad but nodded in agreement.
All right. If that's what you've decided, I'll support you. It's your life, so live it as you like.
My father's eyes welled up with tears as he gave his consent, his emotions barely held in check. After that, I discussed our future plans with my father, and we decided to sell our family home and move away to prevent Lien from coming back. Taking this opportunity, my father entrusted his company to someone he trusted and moved overseas. It seems he had always been interested in living abroad. Later, I had the chance to hear from Jim about what happened to Lien after that. Apparently, after being released by the police, Lien returned home once, but his in-laws sent him to a distant relative's farm to keep an eye on him.
They sent him to the farm because he kept complaining when he came home. They wanted to straighten out his rotten attitude.
He told me, sounding quite enthusiastic about it. As for me, I managed to find a new job and moved to a new town. It will take some time to get used to my new life and sort out my feelings, so for now, I'm focusing solely on my work. I'm not thinking about finding a new boyfriend or getting remarried at the moment. However, I do hope to meet someone wonderful someday, but I'm planning to take things at my own pace. My father and I keep in touch through phone calls, updating each other on our lives. He seems to be enjoying his life abroad, which is a relief. I've heard that he plans to return for Christmas this year, so I'm looking forward to seeing him then. From now on, I'm determined to live my life to the fullest, cherishing every moment.
Enough is enough. You're just like a stranger. Let's just throw you out into the yard.
Wait, please!
Grabbing my arm, they literally threw me into the yard. I heard the sliding door slam shut behind me, and I felt the blood drain from my face in despair.
Enough is enough! You're just like a stranger. Let's just throw you out into the yard.
Were my parents-in-law really expecting me to live out here in the yard? They locked the door from the inside, leaving me completely lost. I thought about going back to my parents' house, but it was quite a distance away, and I didn't have enough money for the fare. Just as my mind went blank, the door flew open with a loud bang. I hoped they had changed their minds, but the voice that came back was cold as ice. Eat. My mother-in-law Madison handed me a box of emergency ration cup noodles. Seeing the box placed on the ground, I was convinced they were serious.
No, please! Wait!
My desperate plea fell on deaf ears as the door slammed shut in front of me.
If something happens to me, they'll be the ones in trouble. Maybe if I throw away the contents, they'll give me proper food.
In desperation, I decided to throw away everything inside. In a fit of frustration, I opened the box roughly, finding it packed with cup noodles. Wait. One of them had a half-open lid. I reached out cautiously and picked up that particular cup noodle.
No way, this is.
My name is Tracy Thomas. I'm a housewife in my 40s. For the 20 years since I married my husband Kevin, I've been struggling with something. It's...
Kevin, I always tell you to put away your clothes.
The living room was littered with clothes Kevin had just tossed around after coming home from work. Kevin had this habit of changing out of his work clothes and just dropping them on the floor. Even now, despite my request, he lay on the sofa, scrolling through his phone. Not only that, he was playing videos at full volume and laughing loudly. Maybe because I interrupted his relaxation time, he spoke in a tone that made it clear he found it all very annoying.
It's not a big deal. You're always so nitpicky. It's not bothering anyone. It's bothering me.
Huh?
Why are you in such a bad mood over something so trivial? Nobody likes a hysterical old woman. What are you gonna do if you get more wrinkles?
The unprovoked insult made me frown deeply. Yes, I was utterly fed up with Kevin's condescending words and attitude. But that wasn't the only problem.
It's really a small thing. Just put your clothes in the laundry basket, that's all I'm asking.
Ugh.
This is why I hate nagging women. You're so dependent on my earnings. Do you even realize you can't live without me?
Kevin grumbled sarcastically, then suddenly shouted loudly for someone.
Dad, Tracy says I should put my clothes away.
Hey.
Since it was a house, not an apartment, there were no neighbors to disturb, but loud voices carried well. Proving this, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, and the living room door was flung open roughly. It was my father-in-law, Kendrick. Kendrick growled lowly from his throat, glaring at me with sharp eyes.
Hey! That's supposed to be your job, Tracy, not his.
His voice boomed like an explosion, assaulting my ears. The intimidation made me shrink my shoulders slightly.
Listen up. You married into this family, so just do what your husband says. That's how it is for women. Don't bother me or Kevin with your nonsense.
I am sorry. At this point, all I can do is bow my head and apologize. Kevin watched me with a nasty grin on his face. Kendrick is a very old-fashioned man, stuck in the ways of the past. Whenever I say something about the household chores or Kevin's behavior, he gets furious and says, "You don't need to worry about that." He often raises his hand, and I've become so used to it that I instinctively flinch. Kevin has already turned his attention to a video on his phone, ignoring me completely. I felt a wave of darkness wash over me as I wondered if I just had to wait until Kendrick's anger subsided. But then, someone else called out to me.
Hey, Tracy, didn't I tell you not to use ham in the cooking?
Standing in the kitchen where I had just finished making dinner was my mother-in-law, Madison.
It's got sodium nitrite in it. It's bad for your health. Also, get rid of that weird gadget Kevin brought home. A famous author said electromagnetic waves shrink your brain.
Madison doesn't argue like Kevin or shout like Kendrick. But she's certainly not on my side. Even now, she's sighing with a piece of aluminum foil in her hand, supposedly to block the brain-shrinking electromagnetic waves. She is obsessed with conspiracy theories. I'm sorry, Madison, but we need to have enough protein. There you go again. Where's the fish from? Did you check the origin? And the additives? She is overly sensitive to the effects of electromagnetic waves and harmful food additives. Because of this, cooking takes much more effort than usual. She checks the ingredient list of every grocery item and restricts what I can use in the cooking. As a result, the meals at the Thomas household are far from healthy. I feel a pang of frustration as I think about the wasted ingredients when she suddenly says, "By the way, Tracy, you mentioned that Kevin eats out a lot. Were you actually jealous of him?" Apparently, Kevin heard her comment. What? Jealous? Kevin, who had been engrossed in his video, turned to us with annoyance. I go out for work. Unlike you, who just does housework. That's not what I meant. You live off my earnings, and you have the nerve to have an attitude? Kevin glances at Kendrick, who looks displeased. Understanding what's about to happen, I can only desperately apologize. I am sorry. It's true that as a housewife, I rely entirely on Kevin for our daily living expenses. The money I have is the allowance Kevin gives me, and if he's unhappy, he quickly reduces the amount. Seeing me bowing and trembling, Kevin seemed satisfied and said, You can't do anything without me, can you? He tossed something at me. As punishment, you're having this for dinner. A cup noodle rolled to my feet with a light thud. No way. Even though I cook for the Thomas family every day. And household chores are far from easy. But I couldn't say anything back, and I could only remain silent. In this house, I have no freedom at all. Why am I going through this? Unable to bear staying in the living room any longer, I took my cup noodles and went back to my room. From the living room, the loud TV and Kevin's voice complaining about work could be heard. I boiled water in the kettle, but I had no appetite and I let out a heavy sigh. How can they say such hurtful things? Remembering their unreasonable words depressed me. I just asked them to correct a habit, it wasn't an unreasonable request. The more I thought about it, the darker my feelings became, wondering where I had made the wrong choice. I couldn't move for a while, weighed down by my heavy heart. As bedtime approached, and hunger became unbearable, I reluctantly ate the cup noodles and took a bath in the cold tub. If I caught a cold, I'd have to ask Kevin for money and permission to go to the doctor, so I got out quickly before my body cooled down. I tiptoed down the quiet hallway back to my room, careful not to make any noise, and secretly took out my diary from the drawer. This diary was my record of daily events to someday reveal how I was treated. When I started dating Kevin, he wasn't like this. He cherished our anniversary and birthdays, and I had never seen him speak harshly. I believed he was kind and married him, but the reality was completely different. I feel like I'm treated as something unclean in this house. This is largely influenced by Madison, who is obsessed with conspiracy theories. Unfamiliar with these theories, I was avoided because my past eating habits, which Madison disapproved of, might negatively affect her son. I had to prepare separate meals and never once joined their circle. Yet, I could secretly eat what I liked and write in my diary, which was a relief. I hope I can report this properly someday. I have wanted to seek help many times. But the thought of my parents being harmed prevents me from taking action. I have no money to escape, and even if I tried to get a job, who would hire a woman in her 40s who has been a housewife all her life? At such times, Kevin's words, "You can't live without me," hit home, and I feel tears of helplessness. In the end, unable to find a solution, I curled up in my bed and slept. The next day, there was an unusual commotion outside my room. Wondering what had happened, Kendrick hurriedly opened my door.
Hey, call an ambulance now. Kevin.
He found Kevin not breathing in bed after trying to wake him up, as he was unusually late in getting up. I frantically called an ambulance. Even though he had tormented me for years, I couldn't ignore him in a life-threatening situation. Listening to the paramedics on the phone, I desperately tried CPR, but Kevin did not come back.
No way, why?
He seemed fine just yesterday, so why did his condition suddenly deteriorate? The sudden event left me in shock, unable to even begin preparations for the funeral after returning from the hospital. The Thomas household was filled with an unusually heavy atmosphere.
I did notice he seemed unwell lately.
Did he? Kendrick murmured. Even he couldn't muster the energy to yell at me now that his son had passed away. I had no idea Kevin had been feeling so poorly. The only time we had as a family was during meals, which we often had in separate rooms, and while I was doing chores during the day, he was out at work, so we rarely saw each other. But I couldn't help but think that if I had noticed something was wrong, things might have been different. No matter how deep the rift between us was, his death was a fact that couldn't be changed. I forgot my usual demeanor and leaned forward without thinking.
Then why didn't he go to the hospital? If he was that sick, there must have been signs.
I told him not to go. I also told him to avoid over-the-counter medications. You never know what they might contain,
Madison said in a haughty tone. It seemed that even knowing about Kevin's illness, her belief in conspiracy theories hadn't wavered. The absurdity of the situation left me feeling utterly drained. I was at a loss for words, both for Kevin, who believed his mother's words, and for Madison, who clung to baseless theories.
Is that so?
People tend to laugh when faced with something completely out of their control. I shook my shoulders slightly. But that was a mistake.
What kind of reaction is that?
A deep voice, almost as if it came from the ground, echoed in my ears. I looked up in surprise.
Oh. No, that's not.
What's not? You just laughed. Are you the type of person who laughs when your husband has died?
I'm sorry. That wasn't my intention. I was thinking about Kevin.
I had definitely made things worse. My emotions were out of control in the face of this sudden tragedy. But there was no turning back, and Madison's cold voice cut through me.
Enough with the excuses.
You laughed. Maybe you poisoned him, didn't you?
No. I didn't do anything like that.
I shook my head, almost in tears. Given how Kevin had treated me, there were plenty of reasons to suspect me. Even though Madison mostly dictated the menu, it was still me who prepared their meals.
That's enough. Without Kevin, you're just a stranger. Let's throw her out into the yard.
Exactly. Don't think you can ever come back into this house. Please wait.
Madison grabbed my arm, and I found myself literally thrown into the yard. The sliding door slammed shut, and I felt the blood drain from my face in despair.
No, this can't be. It's not true.
Living in the yard was out of the question. They locked the door from the inside, and I panicked, wondering if they were serious. Without my journal, I couldn't even make a case against them. I thought about going back to my parents' house, but it was far away. I didn't have enough money for the journey. As I stood there, my mind blank, the door suddenly opened with force.
Madison?
Throwing me into the yard would surely attract the neighbors' attention and wouldn't look good. I hoped she had reconsidered, but the voice that responded was as cold as ever.
Don't call me so casually. If something happens, it'll be a nuisance for us.
Here, eat this. It's full of additives, though. What was handed to me were cup noodles stored for emergencies. Seeing the box placed on the ground, I was convinced they were serious.
No way! Wait, please!
There was no kettle to boil water, no kitchen in the yard, so eating properly was impossible. But my desperate plea was in vain, as the door was closed mercilessly in front of me. I was stunned for a moment. But as time passed, I felt a surge of anger rising from the bottom of my stomach like magma. I can't take this anymore. What have I done to deserve this? Sure, it was wrong of me to laugh. But they didn't listen to a word I said. They never even tried to lend an ear. It had always been like that. There was no freedom for me here, everything they didn't want was eliminated. Talking to someone who has no intention of listening is pointless. If something happens to me, they'll be the ones in trouble. Maybe if I throw away the contents, they'll give me proper food. I was so desperate that I thought about throwing away all the cup noodles. Part of me thought it would be a waste, but the feeling of not wanting to live off cup noodles was stronger. So, I opened the box roughly and found something among the tightly packed cup noodles. Oh, this one's open. One of the lids was half open. A bad feeling came over me as I clenched my fist tightly. Could this be another one of their pranks? I hesitantly reached out and took the cup noodle. Curious, I fully opened the half-open lid, only to find a small black device and a note inside instead of dried noodles and ingredients. What is this? I opened the note. It simply said, "I'm truly sorry for all the hardship you've endured. The recorder inside is evidence. Take it to the police. The envelope contains money for you. Use it to live freely." Is this? The letter paper with elegant rose prints and neat handwriting. I had seen it only a few times, but there was no mistaking Madison's handwriting. Inside the envelope were 5 $100 bills, and in the box of cup noodles, similar envelopes with $500 each were tucked in through small gaps. Additionally, there were documents detailing Kendrick and Kevin's domestic behavior. Before I knew it, I was running to the nearest police station, as if pushed from behind.
Please help me!
Breathing heavily and without shoes, the police officer responded immediately to my appearance. As he read the report and listened to my story, his expression gradually darkened. I was currently thrown into the yard, unable to enter the house or return to my family. Considering all this, he seemed to determine it was an urgent matter. With a serious look, he reassured me by patting my shoulder. "This is terrible. Tracy, you've done well. Can you take me to your house?" Yes. A turning point had finally come in my despairing days. Maybe the days of being oppressed by the Thomas family would change. As I returned home with a faint hope, a shout suddenly echoed from the entrance.
What the hell are you doing?
It was Kendrick's furious voice. Then, a sharp sound echoed, like something being struck hard, and we hurriedly opened the front door.
What's going on?
There stood Kendrick, breathing heavily, and Madison, crouching on the floor, clutching her red, swollen cheek. Kendrick was so furious that he didn't even notice the police officer had arrived. It was clear at a glance what had happened.
Madison!
I screamed as I rushed to her. Madison finally lifted her face. And as soon as her vacant eyes caught sight of me and the police officer, she burst out laughing uncontrollably.
Ha ha ha. What's wrong, Madison?
You.
What are you laughing about? Kevin is gone, and now you want a divorce. Are you kidding me?
Between the two of them, there was a crumpled divorce application lying on the floor. Could Madison have handed it to him? Madison had always been obedient to Kendrick, never contradicting him. Seeing her laughing like she had lost her mind, Kendrick raised his hand high. "Stop it." But a quick-moving police officer restrained him, stopping his movement. It was only then that Kendrick seemed to realize the police officer was there. His face went pale, and Madison started laughing in a high-pitched voice again.
Ha ha ha. Seriously, what's wrong, Madison?
Madison's increasingly abnormal behavior left us all frozen, unable to move. I fearfully called out to her. Madison, her cheeks flushed with excitement, spoke with a smile still on her face.
Finally, it's over, Kendrick.
What? Kendrick, his voice trembling with fear, could barely get the word out. Without giving Kendrick time to process his confusion, Madison continued. You can't move at all right now, can you? You can't hit me even if you want to, can you? Do you know why? Because that police officer over there has more power than you do. Tracy and I have felt the same way all this time. What?
I've been waiting for this day to come.
I was too shocked to form coherent words. What Madison had just said was undoubtedly meant for me. Madison suddenly stopped laughing and wiped the expression from her face. You've always been like this. If something bothers you, you immediately resort to violence. You can't stand it if people don't do exactly what you want. Dialogue is out of the question. You expect those weaker than you to comply, and you take it for granted that others support you. Ever since Kevin was born, you've been violent towards me. You knew I couldn't escape, a housewife estranged from her parents. So I've been planning this day for a long time. Madison's voice was as cold as ice as she glared at Kendrick, explaining her long-laid plans. At first, I didn't have enough evidence, and there was Kevin to consider. I planned to act when Kevin was independent and we had enough money saved. I never imagined Kevin would get married to Tracy so quickly and start acting just like you. Kevin was more cowardly but cunning, so I pretended to be a crazy conspiracy theorist, feeding you both unhealthy food. Hearing that, I was stunned. Indeed, as a housewife tasked with taking care of my in-laws, I had been preparing meals for the three of us. These meals were always in line with Madison's preferences, avoiding additives and foreign ingredients, which she disliked. They were far from what I would consider healthy meals. Despite this, Madison, who disliked me, always said, I don't want to eat the same food as you, and had me prepare separate meals for her. So, I cooked and ate what I wanted. If what she said was true, was all of that just an act? If so, had Madison been excluding me from her plans all along? It was a long battle, but in the end, Kevin fell right into my plan. I suppose the daily stress and poor diet finally took their toll on him. Madison's voice softened for a moment as she thought of Kevin. But the next instant, she burst into a maniacal laugh.
But now, Kevin's inheritance can go to Tracy. You and I are off to hell together. Ha ha ha.
Kendrick was speechless. He just stared at the laughing Madison with wide eyes.
You always acted like a king in this house. Do you realize how powerless you truly are?
It wasn't just me who suffered. She endured far longer than I did, holding on, waiting for this day to come. She fought through a distorted life, never giving up. Let's go. You both need to come to the station. We'll discuss this further there. The police officer spoke quietly. Kendrick no longer had the strength to shout in anger. It was as if all the energy that had driven him evaporated. As he was led away by the police, he murmured in a barely audible voice, I'm sorry. But Madison responded with a tearful, bitter laugh.
What's the point of apologizing now?
And so, we walked silently to the police station. Kendrick admitted to everything recorded on the voice recorder and detailed in the accusation report about the Thomas family's internal affairs. As a result, Kevin's sudden health decline was deemed a planned act, indicating foul play. Naturally, Madison was identified as the perpetrator. After everything was laid out, Madison seemed to shrink, all her malice and triumphant laughter fading away.
Tracy, I'm truly sorry for dragging you into my scheme.
Please, don't apologize. You suffered just as much, Madison.
No, it doesn't change the fact that I hurt you repeatedly.
I remembered the neat handwriting on the note that came with the instant noodles. Now, I could see it as a reflection of her true nature, thoughtful and meticulous.
It must have been so painful to see the food you carefully prepared thrown away for no reason.
No.
I shook my head. It was true that it hurt back then, and I had many nights of tears, but now it felt like a minor thing. It wasn't about forgiveness anymore. We both deserved to be freed from this burden.
It's okay now. It's all over.
10 years have passed since then. Today is Madison's birthday. Since that time, I gathered my courage and started working. I was fortunate enough to find a warm and supportive workplace, allowing me to lead an independent life. And today, I put into action my secret plan to save up my salary and take Madison on a little trip. Look, Madison. The roses are beautiful. Madison, who had been tense and focused on executing this plan for a long time, fell ill right after the events at the Thomas household were resolved. Pushing her wheelchair, which had become essential for her mobility, I walked under an arch where the roses bloomed magnificently.
Yes, they are very beautiful.
She seemed to be enjoying this modest trip. After the incident with the Thomas family, I decided to support her. By now, she is a precious member of my family. We care for each other, share words, and sometimes enjoy moments like this together. Madison, I've also prepared a special birthday cake. Let's eat it together when we get back to the hotel.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
We chatted as we leisurely walked under the roses, explored nearby souvenir shops, and browsed stores aimed at tourists. She seemed to be enjoying herself, so I would say this little trip was a big success. We have gained freedom and follow our hearts, doing what we want to do. As I started humming Happy Birthday to You, I thought about how wonderful it would be if days like this could continue forever.
George! What's wrong?
The doorbell rang, and I was surprised to see my grandson George standing there. He looked like he had just come back from school, carrying his middle school backpack. George had visited us many times before, ringing the doorbell but always running away without saying anything. But that day, he stood still, not moving at all. I saw in his eyes that he wanted to say something. Come over here and help me pick some vegetables. When I opened the gate, George quietly nodded and slowly walked in. For a while, as he helped me with the garden, George remained silent, and I waited for him to open up. After about 10 minutes, George's face twisted, and he began to cry big tears.
Why are you crying? Are you hurt somewhere?
I worried that George might have been injured and checked his arms and legs for any signs of harm.
No, that's not it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for not being able to tell the truth until now.
I waited for George to calm down, then gently encouraged him.
You've wanted to talk about something for a long time, right? Go ahead, tell me.
My name is Michelle, and I'm 65 years old. I used to work as a teller at a local bank. My husband, Stephen, is 2 years older than me and worked at the same bank.
The bank is all about connections between people. Your smile has a magical power to soothe others, making you perfect for this job.
When I first entered the workforce, Stephen guided me with a firm yet kind hand, teaching me the ropes of being a banker and a person. I was drawn to Stephen's genuine kindness and ability to connect with everyone he met. Stephen was highly respected at the bank and eventually rose to the position of branch manager.
Michelle, we've got a great crop of eggplants this year. The tomatoes are still small but looking glossy and cute.
After retiring from the bank, we cultivated a small garden in our backyard, living a modest life while growing vegetables as a hobby. At the end of May, our only son, Nicholas, who had already started his own family, visited us with his wife, Cynthia, and our grandson, George. Nicholas had graduated from college, joined a company in the city, and 5 years later brought his fiancée, Cynthia, to visit us once. After that, we only received a letter announcing George's birth, and for 15 years, we had no contact.
What have you been doing? Not showing up for Christmas or summer vacations. At least call sometimes.
Stephen's voice, trained from his time as a branch manager, boomed through the small house entrance.
I'm sorry, Dad. Work has been so busy that I didn't have time to reach out.
Stephen, calm down. You're scaring Cynthia. I smiled wryly and tried to calm down Stephen, who was getting excited. Stephen's joy often turned into an overwhelming display, making it seem like he was angry to those who didn't know him. It's been a long time, Cynthia. I'm glad to see you doing well.
Sorry for not keeping in touch, Michelle.
Nicholas's wife, Cynthia, looked a bit thinner than when we last met 15 years ago, but her bright smile remained the same. Beside her stood a teenage boy carrying Cynthia's bags, and I smiled warmly at him.
You must be George. Nice to meet you. I'm your granny.
George, feeling shy, just bowed without saying a word. Despite that, I couldn't contain my happiness at meeting my grandson and kept talking.
I've only seen pictures of you as a baby, but now you look so much like Nicholas did when he was young. How old are you now?
George is already 14. He'll be taller than me soon. Nicholas answered, standing next to George. That night, we shared a meal with our son's family for the first time in 15 years. Back then, George was still in Cynthia's womb. I made too many dishes for George, so please help yourself to more. I said, but George only gave a faint smile and didn't say anything. Now that I think about it, Nicholas and Cynthia had been restless since they arrived, only exchanging brief greetings and not talking about their recent lives. Come on, Nicholas, you're back home, so relax like you used to when you were a kid. George won't feel comfortable if you don't. I joked, and Nicholas and Cynthia looked at each other, nodding in agreement.
We were debating whether to ask for your help. Actually, Cynthia and I are currently unemployed. What? No jobs at all? Why?
I was at a loss for words, exchanging glances with Stephen.
We both worked at the same company, but we got tired of the toxic environment. So we decided to quit together and look for new jobs, but we haven't found any yet.
We hate to ask, but could we come over for dinner a few nights a week? Cynthia is a great cook, and I can help with anything around the house.
Nicholas and Cynthia pleaded, please, with strong urgency. Of course, seeing our son and grandson every day would be wonderful, but...
Look up! Do you have any leads on new jobs? George is in middle school. You'll need money for school fees and college prep.
Let's not go overboard, Stephen said, chuckling as he tried to calm my worries.
They have their reasons.
Stephen looked at our son and his family and said,
Like Michelle, I'm not overlooking your situation. But family helps each other in tough times. You can always come here for meals.
He then smiled warmly and turned to me. Is that okay with you, Michelle?
If Stephen says so.
I couldn't say all my worries were gone, but I decided to follow Stephen's lead. With Stephen's permission, our son's family started coming over 2 or 3 times a week. Nicholas and Cynthia spent their days working part-time jobs and searching for new employment. Seeing Nicholas sighing while staring at his account balance made me want to reach out and help. Is everything okay? If it's too hard, don't push yourselves. You can live with us if you need to.
Don't worry, Mom. We'll keep trying a bit longer.
Nicholas's smile reassured me, and I chose to believe him. By mid-June. Do you have an early start tomorrow? The rain is getting heavier, so if you have time, stay over tonight. Stephen suggested, and Nicholas hesitated.
We don't want to impose.
Exchanging glances with Cynthia, he added.
If it's not too much trouble.
So, our son's family started staying overnight. Whenever George came over, he often kept his head down and remained silent. George, is something bothering you? Then Nicholas said,
That's right.
And stepped between George and me.
George did poorly on a test recently and got scolded by his teacher. He's been really down about it ever since.
I see. So, George, you inherited your struggle with studies from Nicholas. It's all his fault. Which means it's my fault.
Stephen's joke made George nod slightly, but I couldn't help feeling that George was just trying to please Nicholas. Around this time, George began visiting our house almost daily, even when he wasn't staying over. He would ring the doorbell and then just stand there, watching us silently. But when I greeted him, George would run off to the bus stop in surprise. Seeing his school backpack, I figured it was on his way home from school.
What's going on with George?
Concerned about George's odd behavior, I talked to Stephen.
Don't worry too much. At 14, it's not unusual for him to have a few problems he can't talk about.
That's true, but...
Even in the pouring rain, George took the bus every day to our house, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a significant reason behind his actions. In early July, the days were oppressively hot and humid. Around midnight, I woke up to a noise. I heard what sounded like footsteps from the next room and held my breath.
Did I lock up properly?
I replayed my memory several times. Before bed, I always checked the locks first, and Stephen double-checked the same places. Even if I missed something, meticulous Stephen wouldn't have. I grabbed my smartphone from the nightstand and cautiously opened the bedroom door. Using the faint light from my phone, I illuminated the room, but nothing seemed out of place.
Maybe it was my imagination?
Stephen, who was sleeping beside me, also woke up. What's wrong?
I thought I heard something, but it must have been nothing.
I made sure everything was locked. Want to check again?
We don't want to wake Nicholas and his family. Let's go back to bed.
Neither Stephen nor I gave it much thought and returned to sleep. Sometime later.
Hurry up!
George, you don't need to wash your face, just grab your stuff.
The sound of hurried footsteps and our son and daughter-in-law's voices woke me up. It was pitch dark outside, not even a sliver of moonlight. Fully awake, I got out of bed and headed to the living room where Nicholas and Cynthia were. The clock showed it was just past 4 a.m. You're up early. What's the rush? My voice startled Nicholas, making him drop his duffel bag. The bag's contents were heavy, and it hit the floor with a dull thud.
Mom, what are you doing up so early?
That's what I should be asking you. What's with the bag? Nicholas hurriedly picked up the bag and hid it behind his back.
It's nothing. It's just something important for work.
That's right. It's nothing you should worry about.
Cynthia added with a nervous laugh.
Work. Wait, did you find a new job?
Yes.
I just got a call from, a friend from college. They want me to start immediately.
Nicholas rambled, and Cynthia nodded along, saying, "Yeah, that's right."
Congratulations! But is it so urgent? Can't you stay for breakfast? We have a meeting first thing in the morning, and it's far away, so breakfast isn't an option.
Just then, Stephen woke up and joined us. "This is sudden. Are you sure this job is trustworthy?" Stephen's concern came through, a habit from his days as a branch manager. "Dad, you've always worried too much."
This is a company run by a college senior, and everyone there is kind.
"There's no problem."
All right then. If you're confident.
With Stephen's acceptance, Nicholas looked relieved.
We have to go now.
Nicholas and Cynthia hurried to the door. But George stood still, not moving.
Come on! Let's go!
Nicholas grabbed George's arm and pulled him outside.
Does George have to go? It's almost summer vacation. He can stay with us.
We appreciate it, Michelle, but we don't want to trouble you further,"
Cynthia said, taking the bag from Nicholas and heading to the car. Nicholas pulled George's arm harder, scolding him.
Stop it!
We watched helplessly as they drove away.
At least Nicholas and Cynthia found work. "We should support them quietly," Stephen said.
Yes, but...
Stephen's straightforward support contrasted with my lingering concern for George. 3 days later in the afternoon, I was harvesting vegetables in the garden. After an hour of work, I took a break in the living room with a cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. I opened the door, expecting a delivery, and was surprised to see George.
George! What are you doing here?
I tried to hide my excitement and surprise. Usually, George would run off when I greeted him, but today he stood still.
Why don't you come in instead of standing there?
I saw in his eyes that he wanted to talk. "Come help me pick some vegetables." "Would you like to?" George hesitated, looking at me silently. "Stephen's out with friends. It would help me if you could step in for him." When I opened the gate and gestured for him to come in, George nodded quietly and walked in slowly. For a while, George helped with the garden in silence, and I waited for him to open up. After about 10 minutes, I noticed a black snake near George's feet. The snake was ready to strike, and George hadn't noticed it yet.
George, watch out!
I immediately pushed George away. The snake lunged and bit my arm. George finally noticed the snake and let out a small gasp. "Wow." But when he saw that I had been bitten, realizing I'd been bitten, he shouted,
Get away from my granny!
And chased the snake away with a stick. As he tried to chase it further, I stopped him. "Thank you, that's enough."
The snake must have been scared of getting stepped on.
I smiled, trying to ease George's fear.
But, Granny, you got bitten. That snake isn't venomous. I'll be fine.
George seemed to collapse in relief, sitting down on the ground.
Why did you protect me?
George looked at me with a puzzled expression, and I asked him back. "Why would you ask that? You're my precious grandson, of course I would help you." Immediately after, George's face crumpled, and he began to shed big tears.
Why are you crying? Are you hurt somewhere?
I worried that George might be injured and checked his arms and legs for any signs of harm. "No, it's not that. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for not telling the truth until now." I waited for George to calm down, then gently encouraged him.
"You've wanted to talk about something for a long time, right? Go ahead, tell me. Dad and Mom told me not to say anything."
With that, George slowly took off his shirt, revealing his back. There were numerous scrapes and bruises, and I was speechless at the sight.
These marks. Did Nicholas do this?
George nodded and began to tell me everything that had happened. After losing their jobs, my son and his wife became addicted to gambling and would take out their frustrations on George. George revealed that the real reason they came close to us was because of the safe Stephen had in his room. Stephen had converted some of his savings into gold bars and kept them in the safe for retirement. Nicholas and Cynthia had planned to steal the gold bars. I overheard their conversation. They threatened me, saying I knew what would happen if I told you. Threatened by Nicholas, George couldn't tell us the truth and had been suffering alone. The couple figured out the safe's combination, took the gold bars, converted them to cash the same day, and left George behind to go on a trip to Australia.
You did well to tell me. You're so brave.
I hugged George tightly as he cried bitterly. An hour later, I told Stephen what had happened when he returned from his gathering.
I can't believe this.
Stephen couldn't accept my story at first. He seemed to understand what I was saying, but his desire to believe in our son was stronger.
It's true. The gold bars are gone.
Stephen quickly went to the room and checked the safe.
No. But that doesn't prove they did it. Someone from outside could have broken in. Remember, you said you heard strange noises that night.
Even now, Stephen was trying to believe in Nicholas's innocence.
You made sure to lock up that night, didn't you? And
what is it? Is there more? I hesitated to show Stephen it until the end, but I finally decided to show him the video George had saved on his smartphone.
This is...
Stephen's face contorted with a mixture of sadness and anger. The video clearly showed Nicholas and Cynthia sneaking into the room, taking the gold bars from the safe, and putting them into a duffel bag.
I didn't want to show you this, but this is the reality.
I held George close and appealed to Stephen's heart.
George's back is covered in scars. He says Nicholas did this to him. George knew about their plan but was too scared to speak out. He must have been terrified all this time, especially today. But George found the courage to tell us the truth. Imagine how much bravery that took. We cannot ignore this child's courage. The one suffering the most here is not me or you, but George.
Stephen looked down at George's face and slowly patted his head. It must have been hard. You must have been in so much pain. I was wrong. Forgive me, George. Stephen shook his head to clear the sadness, then his expression turned to anger. A week later, Stephen and I went with George to the apartment where Nicholas and his family lived. Are Nicholas and Cynthia returning today? I asked for confirmation, and George answered clearly.
Yes.
The fridge is empty. What kind of life have they been living?
According to George, they left only enough money for 10 days of food before going on their trip. Soon, I heard the familiar sound of a car engine parking, followed by footsteps on the stairs, and Nicholas and Cynthia's laughter approaching. The front door slowly opened, and Nicholas and Cynthia, with their sunburned skin, walked in. Did you enjoy the trip? Stephen asked, and their laughter immediately stopped.
Dad, why are you here?
Nicholas and Cynthia hadn't told us their current address. Nicholas glared at George hiding behind me and shouted,
George! Did you tell them? You traitor!
He lunged at George. Just as Nicholas was about to grab George, Stephen stepped in and twisted Nicholas's thin, frail arm.
Ouch! I didn't do anything. Let me go.
The self-defense techniques I learned for bank robbery prevention came in handy.
When Stephen loosened his grip, Nicholas's emaciated body collapsed to the floor.
How does it feel to go on a trip with money you stole from someone else? Stole? What are you talking about?
Nicholas tried to bluff, but Stephen said,
Why don't you just admit it?
And showed the footage George had secretly recorded.
So your goal was the gold bars from the beginning? George! You know what will happen to you later.
Cynthia shouted, causing George to tremble.
So that's how you've been hurting this child. But that ends today. You're going to confess everything you've done.
Nicholas, intimidated by Stephen's glare, lost the will to argue and began to explain. Both Nicholas and Cynthia had a penchant for gambling. Initially, they used their allowance to relieve work stress. However, after experiencing a significant win, they couldn't stop, eventually falling into insurmountable debt.
In the end, I abused my position in accounting and embezzled company funds, which led to our dismissal. We had no choice. No choice? The problem started when you got into debt from gambling. You should have been more responsible as parents before it got that far.
Stephen's stern words left them hanging their heads.
Dad, please. We'll change and work hard from now on, so please don't report us to the police.
Nicholas apologized deeply, and seeing this, Cynthia hurriedly followed his lead. Stephen looked at me and then at George. George, what do you want to do?
I don't want Dad and Mom to get arrested. I just want them to go back to being the kind people they used to be.
Seeing George's sincerity, Stephen nodded with a smile.
All right then.
There's one condition. You two must undergo treatment with a specialist to overcome your gambling addiction. Understood? Got it. We'll do it.
Cynthia nodded and thanked Stephen for his leniency. While our son and his wife focused on their treatment in a facility, George stayed with us. Although commuting by bus took more time, George never complained.
I get to see different views, and I enjoy it more now.
Perhaps George was slowly resolving his feelings toward his parents, as he seemed more appreciative of the little changes around him. Every day after school, George helped with the garden.
Isn't weeding boring?
I asked, and George smiled warmly.
Not at all. Aren't you tired from bending over, Granny?
He asked, concerned for me. During summer vacation, George collected suitable-sized wood from a nearby scrapyard. He skillfully crafted a small chair to make my gardening easier.
Thank you, George. This makes my work much easier.
I'm glad.
I'll make you something even better next time.
As school started, George became more energetic. During dinner, George enthusiastically shared stories about his day at school.
Some people pay to experience farming. When I told my friends I help in Granny's garden, they were jealous.
That's great. Next time, bring your friends over. I'll make some special vegetable curry.
Awesome. But maybe without the bitter melon. Stephen laughed heartily.
What's this? George's taste buds are still childish. I didn't say I hated it. I'll eat it.
George pouted, defending himself against Stephen's teasing. They were more like friends than grandfather and grandson. George, who used to be very reserved, now openly talked with us. Thanks to him, our home was filled with laughter.
Grandpa, thank you for always thinking of me.
George said seriously, and Stephen shyly looked away. Michelle helped you. I didn't notice anything. George shook his head firmly. No, that's not true. You set the safe's code to my birthday, right? I overheard Dad talking about it.
That's not worth thanking me for. You're our precious grandson. We didn't see you for a long time, but we didn't want to forget your birthday.
That's why, thank you, Grandpa. George expressed his gratitude again. Every day, we received letters of apology and reflection from our son and his wife at the facility. While I cherished my time with George, I sometimes wished these moments could last forever. But George still needed his parents and would eventually return to them. Once Nicholas and Cynthia received proper treatment and overcame their addiction, maybe we could all go on a family trip. Hoping for the day they sincerely reflect on their actions, I savor these irreplaceable happy moments.